In 1791, a single black general defeated Napoleon's brother-in-law and 60,000 French soldiers, the same army that had conquered most of Europe. His name was Toussaint Louverture, but he wasn't alone. Across 3 continents, black military commanders were defeating colonial superpowers in battles your history books conveniently forgot. This is the story they never wanted you to know. Picture the world between 1750 and 1900. The transatlantic slave trade had already displaced 12 million Africans, scattering them across continents, tearing families apart, erasing languages, rewriting histories. European powers, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, were carving up entire continents like a dinner table, claiming that racial superiority justified every act of brutality they committed. They told the world a lie so big, so complete, that it would echo through centuries, that black people were incapable of leadership, strategy, or meaningful resistance. They built empires on this lie. They wrote it into their laws, their schools, their churches, and for a long time the world believed them. But here's what they didn't tell you. While European powers possessed advanced weaponry, massive naval fleets, and seemingly unlimited resources, they were facing something they hadn't anticipated. Across the Caribbean, throughout Africa, in South America, enslaved and colonized black communities weren't just surviving. They were preparing. And among them rose military commanders whose strategic brilliance would make colonial generals look like amateurs. The establishment did everything to hide these men and women from history. Colonial archives deliberately omitted their names. Military histories credited white officers for victories won by black commanders. When they couldn't completely erase these generals from existence, they called them savages, rebels, or dismissed their victories as luck. But the truth has a way of surviving, buried in the margins of forgotten documents, whispered through generations, waiting for someone to listen. Let's start with Toussaint Louverture. Born enslaved in 1743 on a Haitian plantation, he worked as a coachman, a position that gave him access to his master's library. While other enslaved people were deliberately kept illiterate, Toussaint taught himself to read. He devoured military history, studying the campaigns of Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great by candlelight. The colonizers never imagined that the quiet coachman was absorbing the very strategies that would one day be used to destroy them. When the Haitian Revolution erupted in 1791, Toussaint was 48 years old. Most men his age would have been broken by decades of enslavement. Instead, he emerged as a military genius. He took untrained, poorly armed, formerly enslaved people and transformed them into a disciplined fighting force that would defeat 3 European superpowers. He understood something the European generals didn't, that guerrilla warfare in Haiti's mountainous terrain could neutralize France's advantages in weapons and numbers. He hit supply lines, melted into the mountains, struck at night, and disappeared before reinforcements arrived. Napoleon, who had conquered most of Europe, couldn't figure out how to defeat him. But Toussaint wasn't the only one. Travel back further, to 1583 in Angola, and you'll meet Queen Nzinga. Yes, a queen who personally led troops into battle. European historians tried to paint her as an anomaly, a curiosity, but the Portuguese soldiers who faced her knew better. She ruled for 40 years, fought off Portuguese colonizers well into her 60s, and used guerrilla warfare tactics that Europeans wouldn't officially invent for another century. She was a master diplomat who played European powers against each other, forming alliances with the Dutch when it suited her, converting to Christianity to negotiate as an equal with Portuguese officials, then renouncing it when it was convenient. She understood the colonial game better than the colonizers themselves. The Portuguese threw everything at her: superior firearms, trained professional soldiers, the backing of one of Europe's wealthiest empires. It didn't matter. Nzinga used Angola's highland terrain to neutralize their technological advantages. She established a sophisticated network of spies and informants. She relocated her entire kingdom multiple times to avoid capture, turning retreat into strategy. It took Portugal 40 years of continuous warfare just to establish a meaningful foothold in Angola. And even then, Nzinga died undefeated at 80 years old, her kingdom still independent. Now jump forward to West Africa in the 1880s. Meet Samurai Ture, a man who built an empire of 10 million people and held off French colonial forces for 16 years. The French came with Gatling guns, modern rifles, and the arrogance of men who believed African resistance was primitive and disorganized. What they found instead was an opponent who had built his own military-industrial complex. Samurai Ture was manufacturing 300 to 400 rifles per week, matching European colonial production rates. His empire had a sophisticated intelligence network, a mobile army that could relocate faster than French forces could track, and a leader who understood logistics as well as any European general. When the French cut off his supply routes in 1882, Samurai did something that stunned European military observers. He relocated his entire empire 500 miles east, moving tens of thousands of people along with livestock, weapons, and supplies in an organized migration that European commanders couldn't comprehend. He used scorched earth tactics, burning resources to deny them to French troops. He adapted European military technology and improved upon it. The French needed 16 years, 30,000 troops, and their most modern weapons to finally capture him. And even then, they didn't defeat him in battle. He was betrayed by an ally. Then there's Antonio Maceo in Cuba, a general who survived 26 bullet wounds and machete strikes. Spanish colonial forces called him the Bronze Titan, with a mixture of respect and fear. He became second in command of Cuban revolutionary forces and led campaigns that drove Spanish generals to desperation. The Spanish Empire, which had once dominated half the world, couldn't break him. The pattern repeats across continents and decades. Colonial powers attacked. Black generals adapted, innovated, and won battles they had no statistical right to win. And then, systematically, deliberately, history was rewritten. Let's return to Haiti in November 1803 to a battle called Vertières. Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe, both formerly enslaved men, commanded 27,000 troops against France's final stronghold. Napoleon had sent 43,000 soldiers to crush what he called a slave rebellion. After 12 years of brutal warfare, the black generals stood on the verge of something impossible. They won. On January 1st, 1804, Haiti became the first black republic in history, the only nation born from a successful slave revolt. But here's what they don't teach you in school. The Haitian Revolution didn't just free enslaved people. It changed the entire trajectory of Western civilization. It bankrupted France so completely that Napoleon was forced to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States, doubling America's size overnight. It inspired anti-slavery movements worldwide. It proved that the ideology underpinning colonialism and slavery was built on lies. If enslaved people could defeat Napoleon's finest generals, if black military commanders could outthink Europe's best strategic minds, then the entire justification for racial hierarchy collapsed. And that's exactly why Europe and America punished Haiti for winning. France, the nation that had lost militarily, demanded reparations. Think about that for a moment. The enslaved people who won their freedom were forced to pay their former masters for the crime of liberation. France demanded 150 million francs, equivalent to $21 billion today, as compensation for the loss of enslaved people as property. Haiti was forced to pay this debt from 1825 to 1947. 122 years of payments for winning their freedom. This wasn't just cruelty, it was strategic. The colonizers lost the war, so they rigged the peace. They crippled Haiti's economy before it could even begin. And this financial sabotage, not poverty or corruption or any of the other explanations you've been fed, is why Haiti struggles today. They won on the battlefield and lost in the ledgers of European banks. Modern military historians, when forced to analyze these campaigns objectively, have reached uncomfortable conclusions. Toussaint Louverture's tactical innovations in guerrilla warfare predated modern insurgency tactics by 150 years. Queen Nzinga's diplomatic maneuvering demonstrated political sophistication that rivaled any European monarch of her era. Samurai Touré's military organization was, in the words of British officers who observed it, better organized than many European forces. The Haitian generals defeated the finest military minds Napoleon had to offer, using terrain mastery, psychological warfare, and strategic thinking that still impresses military scholars today. The evidence was always there, hidden but never destroyed. French military archives contain reports describing Haitian forces as extraordinarily disciplined and superior in morale. Portuguese documents reluctantly admit Nzinga's military acumen and strategic brilliance. British officers wrote that Samurai Touré commanded his forces with remarkable sophistication. They knew, they always knew, but knowing and admitting are different things. After the Haitian Revolution, slave-holding powers across the world panicked. America banned Haitian goods. Europe refused diplomatic recognition for 60 years. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote that all men are created equal, refused to even acknowledge Haiti's existence. Why? Because Haiti's success proved that enslaved people could overthrow their masters. It proved that black military leaders could defeat white ones. It shattered the ideological foundation that made slavery and colonialism possible. So these generals were erased by design, not by accident. Military academies that studied guerrilla warfare wouldn't credit Toussaint or Nzinga. They'd cite white European officers decades later who used identical tactics. History books describe the Haitian Revolution as chaotic or lucky, deliberately obscuring the sophisticated military strategy involved. Queen Nzinga became a footnote, if she appeared at all. Samurai Touré was reduced to a tribal leader, resisting progress. When you erase a people's victories, you erase their power. When you hide their generals, you hide their capacity for resistance. When you delete their strategic brilliance from the record, you can pretend they never possessed it in the first place. This wasn't accidental. This was the Second War, the one fought with pens and printing presses instead of guns. But here's what they couldn't erase: the truth. It doesn't disappear. It just waits, buried in archives, passed down through oral histories, hidden in the margins of colonial reports, written by men who couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. And now, centuries later, we're finally excavating it. Toussaint Louverture died in a French prison in 1803, locked in a cold cell in the mountains, far from the Haiti he'd freed. But not before his revolution liberated 500,000 people and proved that no chain was unbreakable. Queen Nzinga died undefeated at 80 years old, her kingdom still independent, her legacy intact. Samurai Touré was finally captured, not defeated in battle, but betrayed by someone he trusted. And even in captivity, he never surrendered. They wanted you to forget these names. They needed you to forget them, because remembering is dangerous. Every time you learn a name they tried to bury, you're participating in an act of resistance. Every time you share a story they wanted forgotten, you're continuing the fight these generals started centuries ago. The next time someone tells you that history is objective, that it simply records what happened. Remember this: entire military geniuses were deleted from the record. Victories that changed the course of civilization were attributed to luck. Strategic brilliance that impressed even enemies was dismissed as primitive. Not because it didn't happen, but because admitting it happened would destroy the lies that empires were built upon. These black generals didn't just win battles, they won impossible battles. And then they were erased for the crime of being too powerful, too brilliant, too dangerous to the narrative that justified centuries of oppression. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It's surfacing now, in fragments and documents, in histories being rewritten, in stories like this one. And every person who hears these names, who learns these stories, becomes a keeper of truth that empires tried to kill. Don't let them be forgotten again.